One thing about video games and most experiences in general, like watching movies, listening to music, or reading books, that I honestly despise is the first time. The first time for just about everything is normally the best time, or really the most memorable. Think about the first time you rode a bike, the first day you went to school, or the first time you saw your favorite movie, the first time you said I love you, whatever it is. It's disappointing to me that I know I will never play my favorite video games for the first time ever again. As I sat down and started up The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the 4th playthrough of the game, I pondered if I would ever play the game with the same excitement and awe as I did the first time I played it. Now, I may be a bit biased since the first time I played Breath of the Wild was March 3rd when it came out for the Switch, and the teacher I had allowed me to play it on a projector as a bunch of other kids did work and watched me play. As I played through it again, I started to think of what could make this a better Zelda game. Now, it goes without saying, but personally, I view Breath of the Wild as the best Zelda game of all time, and at the moment, it is my favorite video game of all time. Though I do not think Breath of the Wild is a perfect game by any means. I don't think that any game is a perfect game, which is why I don't really like number-based review scores, but that's a different video entirely. For my first video, I wanted to discuss Breath of the Wild, how the game is like the first Zelda, but not really like the first Zelda, how the game could expand upon itself, yet stay more true to itself, and add some old Zelda tropes like items while innovating like it did, and ultimately getting closer to the perfect Zelda game. Hi, I'm the Great Magikarp, and this is how Breath of the Wild could have been even better. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was announced way back in 2013, and ever since the beginning of development for the game, the main idea was to challenge the conventions of Zelda, even to bring the series back to its roots. Obviously, to do that, Nintendo and the team turned to the 1986 original that kicked the series off, The Legend of Zelda. So what made that game so good and revolutionary? Was it the incredible story? Was it the compelling gameplay? You could make an argument for either, but I think the real reason it was revolutionary was the way the world was laid out and how you could go anywhere. From the beginning of the game, there are a few places that you can't go. Those 2 places are dungeons in fact, and you need the raft to get to them. As you move through the land, you'll learn the layout just by playing, and of course you can't get to certain places unless you solve a small puzzle or get hints from NPCs in the world, like for example the Lost Woods. In fact, from the starting screen, other than the 2 places previously mentioned and Ganon's lair, you can go anywhere in the overworld if you know what you're doing. If we look at the 2017 remake of this game, Breath of the Wild, it's quite a bit different. At the beginning, we have a small tutorial section teaching you the basics of the game, since this game is quite a bit different compared to the original Zelda. It's a lot more complex, but once you get off the Great Plateau, you can go anywhere on the map. Now, if you start to draw the parallels here between these 2 games, the obvious points stick out. Open world, can go anywhere, little hand-holding, and complete freedom. Just like the original Zelda, in Breath of the Wild, you may be walking around or gliding into some new territory, and pretty soon you might see some scary monsters. You might even get your butt kicked depending on how far you are in the game. This is obviously the same with the original Zelda. If you go to the west, you'll meet some Lionels who will destroy you considering you only have 3 hearts and a flimsy wooden sword. It'll teach you that maybe you need to go somewhere else and get a bit stronger first. In fact, you can even wander into dungeons that you truly aren't ready for yet. Here's the main difference that I have an issue with. In Breath of the Wild, we have 4 divine beasts as the main quote-unquote dungeons. I'm not here to complain about how easy they were or how dumb they were in general. In fact, I'm here to complain about where they were. Now let's look at Zelda 1 for example. One of the most talked about things by series producer Eiji Onuma about Breath of the Wild was the fact that you could start the game and go straight to Ganon. In Zelda 1, however, you can't. Now, does this make Zelda 1 inferior? Of course not, and honestly, I thought it was a better idea to make you play the game first. Of course, most players didn't just straight go to Ganon, but the fact that you can, I believe, is an issue with the game. Now let me explain. In Breath of the Wild, how do you level up, per se? You go around, you find shrines, and once you finish 4, you can get a heart container or some extra stamina. Now for Breath of the Wild this works, mainly because it has such a huge world, you have to fill it with something. You can also get heart containers from the Divine Beasts, but they aren't required to fight Ganon. So the only reason you would do the Divine Beasts is 1, because you're curious, 2, you want to do it for the main story, or 3, you just want the power that you get. When I first played the game, I did it for the main story, but after my first playthrough, I really didn't feel the need to. And in fact, the only Divine Beast that I did after my first playthrough was the one with Revali, so I could get Revali's Gale. I already knew the story, and spoiler alert, the Divine Beasts only make a pretty easy boss fight even easier. In fact, I'd make the argument that the boss battle without the Divine Beasts is harder and more fun since you have to do a boss rush of them, but that's beside the point. So like I established earlier, there really is no reason to do the Divine Beasts. I blame that on the fact that you can just run straight to Ganon. I know that having the choice is important to a lot of people, especially speedrunners, but for the whole game, I think this certain choice hurts it from a narrative standpoint and ultimately from the gameplay perspective. Let's actually borrow from Zelda 1 at this point. What if instead of 4 Divine Beasts in the 4 corners of the map that you may or may not need to beat, you had, let's say, 10 dungeons scattered around the map, hidden but available to you at any time? Kinda like how it is in Zelda 1. But Magikarp, that's what the shrines are for, I hear you say, but think about this. The shrines are like the hidden heart containers in Zelda 1, random pieces that'll just help you along the journey. Now what if the dungeons are like Zelda 1? They contain the pieces you need to fight Ganon, not necessarily the Triforce pieces, but for Breath of the Wild, what if we made it into, I don't know, pieces of the Divine Beasts? What if the Divine Beasts weren't roaming around and destroying stuff, but what if you needed to get them up and running for the new Champions of Hyrule? Yeah, remember those guys? The 4 descendants of the champions? The ones that you met? They helped you, and then they kind of disappeared? Consider the following. Each Divine Beast has 3 parts you need to find to help get it running. Then you board the beast and clean it out like in the original Breath of the Wild. But you can use your new friends like how they did in Wind Waker. You need their champion blood to help clear it. Then, once you have all the parts and cleared the Divine Beasts, the new champions will take control of the Divine Beasts, and the blast that originally halves Ganon's health will just open the door for you to fight him. This opens up so much more for the game, like what if the dungeons were hidden labs built by the ancient people, to get more lore on them and maybe more lore on what happened just 100 years ago. You can stumble on these dungeons, but some may not be feasible to do until you get a certain item or you get to a certain level in strength with hearts, armor, and weapons. Like what? Maybe the first Zelda game? This could even give more characterization to the new champions and the dead champions. Narratively, you could change it into Zelda and the other champions were trying to get the Divine Beast working to destroy Calamity Ganon, then Calamity Ganon showed up and killed everything. So Link needs to fix them up with the help of his new champions and then use them to fight Ganon. Then you have about 8 to 16 true dungeons scattered throughout the map that you have to do before you fight Ganon. You know how this could be even better though? The champions mention where they think the dungeons are, but they don't just point to it. Or maybe you can hear some riddles through NPCs. They reveal some riddle to you after you beat the dungeon to help you look for it, or you can just stumble upon some of them as you explore. You have to find it yourself, like in the original Zelda. And honestly, that's what I imagined for the dungeons when they said that they were looking back at Zelda 1. I mean, just completely huge dungeons spread throughout the world that you can just stumble upon. Now, if you give the world true dungeons, and then you can add, get this, items. Hookshot, bombs, boomerang, anything really. Keep the weapons and bows, keep the Sheikah tablet abilities if you want. You might have to change the bomb one, but bam, then you can add regular items back into the game. Now you don't have to by any means, but you could just make them more of a convenience than anything. Or even just make the items exploratory items only, like the candles, the raft, or just have the items be non-combative like the beetle, the whip, and many more. If you wanted, you could even make the dungeons just carry special weapons or special armor to help you solve the puzzles within the dungeon and outside, kinda like the iron and hover boots or the red and blue tunics from Ocarina of Time. Or better yet, there are some items you need from certain dungeons that'll unlock the door to another dungeon. Speaking of, with the addition of dungeons, you can make the world even larger with special items that let you swim underwater and explore huge bodies of water in the game, something that was severely lacking in Breath of the Wild. Or what if, instead of just items, you get specific Sheikah tablet upgrades to help with the dungeons coming up and the divine beasts? I mean, if they are scientific labs, you might need to use the technology you have on hand. This would expand upon the dungeons and how you interact with them, especially if we completely got rid of the Great Plateau, so you didn't need to get those in the beginning. Then that would give you even more of a reason to look for these dungeons to help you finish the shrines, officially intertwining the shrines and the dungeons. So you need to get tablet upgrades to do shrines. So you explore and you do some shrines that you can do, then you do some dungeons, then with that ability you can unlock some more shrines, then you get stronger through shrines, and then you're able to go to harder dungeons and areas. It's a nice little circle. The items and such are not necessary by any means, and honestly the thing that I had most issue with was the fact that the divine beasts didn't feel like true dungeons with a theme and specific things to do in them. That's the main thing I would change for Breath of the Wild 2 or whatever it is. Take the ideas you had from Zelda 1 and go back more to Zelda 1. If you had dungeons scattered throughout the world that you could just find, like shrines, it would add more depth to the world. It could add more depth to the lore of the game. It could even add depth to the characters of the game, adding more story. It could add so much more. Instead of just breaking the convention of Zelda, they broke them. We understand that, but what if you also looked back a teensy bit more? I'm not saying that they should have stuck to the Zelda formula more. In fact, the changes they made to Zelda and breaking the conventions were incredible. The combat feels more challenging, and I could talk for hours on the AI. The explorative nature of the world is incredible and makes you want to go to every nook and cranny to find another shrine or maybe just some old boot. The changes they made to the Zelda formula were needed, but it needed the perfect blend of traditional and new Zelda. No, I'm not saying Breath of the Wild is too unconventional. It's nice to know that Zelda really heard the fans after Skyward Sword, even though I still love that game dearly. What I'm saying is how much they talked about going back to the roots and breaking conventions while keeping true to the originals. They didn't really show up in that department. They innovated incredibly well for the series by breaking the conventions, but what if they had tweaked a few conventions that could have stayed, like dungeons, items, swimming underwater, instead of just removing them altogether? Then I believe Breath of the Wild could have been even better. Thanks for watching this little video of my thoughts on Breath of the Wild. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button and comment what you think could have made Breath of the Wild a better game. Whether it be old Zelda conventions or completely removing more conventions. I'd love to know. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll carp you later.